Political shockwaves are ripping through Washington. Power games are escalating in Europe. Backroom deals, sudden moves, and leaders claiming to control at any cost. On the battlefield, everything is changing fast. Key cities refuse to fall, enemy columns vanish, and unmanned systems are rewriting the rules of war in real time. Allies hesitate, rivals maneuver, and one wrong decision could trigger consequences far beyond the front line. What's really happening behind the scenes? And why might the next hours be decisive? All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. Another aircraft down for the occupiers. Ukrainian forces have smashed an enemy armored column in the Pokrovsk sector, and Ukraine's unmanned systems forces are setting truly extraordinary new records. Ukrainian defenders continue to apply pressure along key sections of the front, delivering precise strikes against enemy equipment and logistics while maintaining control of critical positions. These are the very latest developments from the front line, reflecting both the intensity of the fighting and Ukraine's increasing technological and tactical advantage.
A cauldron for the occupiers in Kupiansk. Analysts from the Deep State project have reported successes by Ukrainian defenders in the northwestern outskirts of the city. In particular, they report that as a result of a successful operation, enemy forces have been blocked by the defense forces. At the same time, enemy enclaves still remain in the central part of Kupiansk.
The operation began with the establishment of a defensive line, blocking and cutting off the enemy garrison in the city from its main forces. The defense forces rather swiftly took control of Ryadekivka and Kondrashivka and also brought Holubivka under fire control. After that, a clearing operation was carried out in Mern. The occupier's Soviet-era name Moskovka refers to the northwestern outskirts of Kupiansk itself.
At the same time, the defense forces continue to identify and eliminate the occupiers. The operation is ongoing. As a result of another well-coordinated operation by the armed forces of Ukraine, an enemy column was destroyed in the Pokrovsk direction. The occupiers tried to take advantage of the weather conditions and using armored vehicles, cars and motorcycles attempted to break through from the northern part of the city to the southern part. But their plan failed. On their way, they were met by fighters from the 7th Air Assault Corps and the 68th Jaeger Brigade. However, for the Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, the fog turned out to be an advantage. Thus, thanks to poor visibility, fighters from the main intelligence directorate on the same Pokrovsk direction managed to infiltrate the enemy's rear. Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups also managed to destroy an enemy command post during their raid. In recent days, among others, the forces of unmanned systems have also distinguished themselves in destroying enemy forces. Lately, they have been setting incredible records. In just 2 days, drone pilots destroyed 2 battalions of enemy personnel. And this is just the beginning. Last night, the commander of the unmanned systems forces, call sign Madyar, reported that his pilots, in just one, not even a full day, 505 occupiers. Most of them are paratroopers from the 76th Division who were redeployed to Donbass.
That's all you need to know about the current pressure on the front line. The Dobropilsky, Pokrovsky and Hulyapol sectors. The average daily SPS figure in November was 282. Worms. 8,473 specimens over 30 days. The average daily number for 11 days in December is 395 bodies per day, already totaling 4,325. Yuck! With
each passing day, the occupiers are losing not only soldiers but also expensive equipment. For example, our general staff has confirmed the destruction of another Russian aircraft. The day before, alarming news spread through Z channels from Kacha, a base in temporarily occupied Crimea, where a combat drone struck an An-26 at the military airfield. The Russians also reported losses among their officer corps.
A drone hit an An-26 on the ground. There are dead and wounded.
Another extremely alarming piece of news reached the Russian command from a place they least expected. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, together with the partisan movement Black Spark, carried out a successful operation all the way in the Caspian Sea. Off the coast of Kalmykia, saboteurs managed to strike 2 Russian vessels transporting weapons. We are talking about the sanctioned cargo ships Composer Rachmaninov and Oskar Sarija, which Russia uses for military purposes.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, two towns that have become powerful symbols of the resilience and unbreakable spirit of the Ukrainian army. Under constant pressure and repeated assaults, Ukrainian defenders continue to hold their positions, disrupt enemy plans, and prevent any strategic breakthrough in this crucial sector. These cities have turned into strongholds of resistance, where discipline, coordination, and determination play a decisive role every hour. What is happening in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad at this very moment, how the defense is organized, and why these directions remain critically important for the entire front. All the key details are in our next in-depth report.
The Russians are storming Pokrovsk with columns of military vehicles. Trying to take advantage of the bad weather conditions, the occupiers launched an assault using armored vehicles and motorcycles. The Ukrainian armed forces, who were already expecting the Russian advance, eliminated the enemy almost immediately. Ukrainian defenders report that the work to destroy enemy equipment and personnel is ongoing. Various components of the defense forces are being involved in the defense of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The Airborne Assault Group, assault units of the SBS, SSO, SBU, the National Guard, and the National Police.
Ukraine's defense forces control about 13 square kilometers of the Pokrovsk settlement's territory. The total area of the settlement is about 29 square kilometers. Moreover, the Ukrainian defense forces control the high-rise residential district, which is essentially the commanding heights. Accordingly, the fighting is taking place in the so-called industrial zone area.
The logistics for the Ukrainian armed forces remain complicated. To strengthen our supply capabilities, an operation is underway to expand the logistics corridors between the satellite city of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad.
The occupiers' efforts are attempts to break through to Hrishin, which is a key logistical component for the Ukrainian defense forces. In the Pokrovsk direction, the occupiers are not giving up attempts to operationally encircle the Ukrainian defense forces in the Myrnohrad area. The main goal of the occupying forces is, once again, to establish direct physical control over the locations of the Ukrainian defense forces.
In order to seize Pokrovsk, the Russian command has transferred operational reserves there, which are also being ground down in unsuccessful attempts to capture the city. Realizing this, Russian soldiers have begun to be hospitalized en masse without being redeployed to the Pokrovsk direction. This was reported by the partisan movement Atesh. According to the medical unit's data, the number of requests from the occupiers has already far exceeded the norm. Groups of soldiers are heading to the hospital, using old injuries, questionable diagnoses, and any excuse to avoid rotation. The fall of Pokrovsk will not lead to the collapse of Ukraine's defenses, but it will weaken Kiev at a sensitive moment in negotiations to end the war under the auspices of the United States, Reuters writes.
The main message promoted by the Russian side is that if Ukraine does not withdraw from the territories of Donetsk region according to the agreements, the Russian Federation will seize these territories by military means. Russian special services are preparing a series of provocations both in Pokrovsk and in the Pokrovsk direction, with the aim of accusing the Ukrainian defense forces of using prohibited chemical poisonous substances.
No matter what anyone says, the defense forces have remained in active defense on the Pokrovsk front for more than a year, currently controlling 40% of the city, where the Ukrainian flag is raised in the center.
The political pendulum in the United States has swung once again. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie has shaken up the information space by introducing a bill that calls for the United States to withdraw from NATO. According to Massie, the alliance is a relic of the Cold War era, and American resources, he argues, should be directed not towards supporting allies abroad, but towards strengthening the country's own borders and addressing domestic priorities. What is really behind this proposal, and what the actual chances are that such an idea could move beyond rhetoric and become reality? We break it all down in our analysis.
U.S. House Representative and Republican Thomas Massie has introduced a bill for the United States to withdraw from NATO. This became known from the text of the bill, which Massie published on the social network X.
NATO is a relic of the Cold War. The United States should leave NATO and use that money to defend our own country, not socialist countries. Today I introduce Bill H.R. 6508 to end our membership in NATO.
In his proposed bill, Massie stated that NATO as an organization was specifically created to oppose the Soviet Union, which dissolved more than 30 years ago.
Since then, U.S. participation has cost taxpayers trillions of dollars and still carries the risk of involving the U.S. in foreign wars.
This bill requires U.S. President Donald Trump to officially notify NATO of the withdrawal no later than 30 days after the law comes into effect. In addition, the document states that the bloc's original Cold War-era purpose no longer aligns with the national interests of the United States. The proposed bill explicitly stipulates that the European member nations of NATO must possess sufficient economic and military potential to effectively ensure their own defense, and it specifically prevents the use of American taxpayers' money to fund the organization's joint budgets. However, to fully comprehend such a significant statement from this particular Republican, one first needs to thoroughly understand precisely who Thomas Massie is.
This particular congressman is, well, quite a very specific and distinct kind of congressman. He is, let's say, a prominent representative of the Republican Party community, closely associated with the MAGA movement. In other words, he is largely an isolationist, a staunch advocate for minimizing extensive government interference in the personal lives of people, and generally believes that the United States should significantly minimize its active involvement in carrying out any kind of complex foreign policy initiatives.
Political analyst Petro Oleszczuk is convinced it cannot be said that this opinion in such a loud statement by Massie is mainstream in the United States.
However, in the context of the White House introducing a new version of the US foreign policy strategy, which has already sparked heated debate not only in the US but also around the world, he is probably trying to use this trend in some way to advance his own vision for the future of the United States.
Reuters, citing sources, reports that last week a meeting took place in Washington between Pentagon officials overseeing NATO policy and several European delegations. During the negotiations, Washington did not announce any plans to leave the alliance, but wants Europe to take on the majority of NATO's conventional defense capabilities, from intelligence to missiles. The deadline set by the Americans is the year 2027.
Shifting this burden from the US to the European members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization would fundamentally change how the United States, one of the founding members of the post-war alliance, cooperates with its most important military partners.
In addition, according to media reports, at the meeting, Pentagon representatives noted that Washington is still not satisfied with the steps Europe has taken to strengthen its defense capabilities after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
With Trump's arrival, isolationist sentiments are growing stronger. The United States then declares that it is not particularly interested in defending Europe, that Europe should defend itself, and that their priorities lie in the Pacific region.
The media reports that American officials have told their colleagues that if Europe does not meet the requirements by 2027, the US may cease participating in certain NATO defense coordination mechanisms.
What is unique about this strategy? Although the strategy does not explicitly call for the United States to leave NATO, it clearly states that the United States will reduce its participation in NATO programs and that Europeans themselves should be primarily responsible for their own defense. Overall, the defense of Europe is no longer considered an issue for the United States.
At the same time, several European officials have stated that the deadline of 2027 is unrealistic. Regardless of how Washington assesses the progress, Europe needs more than just money and political will to replace certain US capabilities in the short term.
We have made it clear that it is necessary for Europeans to take the lead in the conventional defense of Europe. We strive to work through NATO coordination mechanisms to strengthen the alliance and ensure its long-term viability. As European allies increasingly take on responsibility for conventional deterrence and defense in Europe.
But whatever the case may be, one thing is clear. There are plenty of questions piling up for NATO. And the Americans themselves have made it clear. Things will not be as they were before.
For now, Congress is not ready to vote for the United States to leave NATO. However, this is a certain indicator of the trends that are being observed in American politics. So probably, for now, the United States will not be leaving NATO. But for the time being, the trend is that NATO will become an increasingly elusive structure, and the question will arise as to whether the United States will really defend its NATO allies. For now, in the context of Trump's actions, all of this looks very, very well strange.
Putin is rushing to seek an audience with Erdogan, with the two leaders expected to meet in Turkmenistan. Against the backdrop of Ankara's recent statements and concrete actions, this meeting raises serious questions about Moscow's intentions and the Kremlin leader's growing need for external diplomatic support. Why does the bunker-dwelling ruler of Russia suddenly require a face-to-face conversation with the Turkish president? And even more importantly, how could this meeting influence Turkey's position on Ukraine? From political backing and mediation efforts to military, economic and strategic cooperation, we break down all the key motives, risks and possible consequences in our next report.
While world capitals are trying to find a way to achieve a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia in Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan, where the International Forum on Peace and Security is taking place, a meeting may occur that could change the balance of power. We're talking about a potential conversation between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the Russian dictator Putin. In
an era when uncertainty, conflicts and vulnerability are rapidly increasing around the world, it is more important than ever to take responsibility for strengthening international dialogue, cooperation, trust and peace. Drawing on our history, geography and civilizational heritage, we are making every effort to uphold the principles of dialogue and peaceful coexistence. We strive to maintain good neighborly relations and to create a belt of stability and security around us. We sincerely wish for a swift end to the war between our northern neighbors, Russia and Ukraine, with whom we share deep, historical and mutually respectful relations. Turkey is ready to provide real support to any diplomatic initiatives aimed at achieving a ceasefire and establishing peace, including the Istanbul process.
However, according to experts' forecasts, we should not expect any breakthrough decisions.
It will be purely an information exchange type of process. That is, there will be an exchange of information, an exchange, and perhaps the preparation of some elements of a peace track, including the regulation of navigation in the Black Sea, which is extremely important both for Russia and for Ukraine and also Turkey. It is quite possible that some economic issues will also be addressed. After all, there is the issue of the South Stream, which runs through Turkish territory, and Nabucco, as well as the construction of nuclear power plants in Turkey by Russians. All of these could also be discussed. So it's not necessarily just a military track, but also economic issues related to the military track.
Meanwhile, in an exclusive interview with CNN, the prominent Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan explicitly stated that Ukraine is now truly facing a very difficult and challenging choice. Consequently, Europe must actively help official Kyiv
make the right decision. But in order to prevent greater losses, that is, for the greater good, it is necessary to eliminate evil here, meaning what is bad. In other words, a choice must be made. I know this is difficult for everyone, especially since the issue of territory is incredibly hard. May God never let anyone face such a thing.
For Ankara, this is not just diplomatic rhetoric. Turkey is trying to regain its status as a mediator. Let me remind you that it was in Istanbul last summer that 3 rounds of negotiations took place. And back then, despite skepticism, the parties were able to make progress on certain issues. For example, in humanitarian prisoner exchanges and specific security mechanisms.
This laid the groundwork for the negotiations that are ongoing today. We are ready to play this positive role. Look, right now the Black Sea has become a battlefield. The war has spread to the Black Sea. Now in the Black Sea, commercial ships and tankers are being attacked. If the war continues, it will spread to other regions of Europe as well. In other words, God forbid, it must be stopped here.
But whether another round of talks can bring peace closer to Ukraine remains an open question. The details of a possible meeting between Erdogan and Putin remain unclear. Neither Ankara nor Moscow is giving direct confirmation, limiting themselves to hints and cautious wording. However, one thing is clear, any contact will inevitably touch on the topic of the war. And it is important to remember that Turkey has repeatedly emphasized its support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and hopes to play the role of mediator, but without concessions that undermine international law.
Viktor Orban is searching for ways to hold on to power, even if he loses the parliamentary elections scheduled for April. According to reporting by Bloomberg, the Hungarian Prime Minister is considering a potential move to the presidency as a strategic fallback option. Such a step could allow him to preserve political influence and control over key state processes, even in the event of an electoral defeat. What mechanisms could make this possible, how realistic this scenario is, and what it could mean for Hungary's democracy and its relations with the EU? All the key details ahead.
Operation Eternal Power, 15 years as Prime Minister, but even that's not enough.
Our victory in the elections is so big you can see it from the moon and even more so from Brussels.
A political maneuver is being prepared in Hungary, which increasingly resembles the Russian scenario. Viktor Orban is a contender for the role of the second Putin within the EU.
Here, in my opinion, it's a very slippery issue. You can't say that Orban can't be completely pro-Russian. He has to be pro-Hungarian. And in fact, it's no coincidence that his ratings are falling, because right now he's too pro-Russian. And in this sense, when Orban completely falls into Moscow's embrace, it could further fuel the engine of protest within the country.
The turning point will be the parliamentary elections in 2026. According to polls, Orban's party could lose for the first time in many years. And this is exactly where the plan to rewrite the constitution and take the president's seat comes in.
The reason by and large is just one. It's the desire to stay in power as long as possible. For what purpose? In order to steal as much money as possible. And in fact, simply keeping oneself in power is also quite pleasant. It's quite possible that the new government will investigate the clearly criminal offenses he and his inner circle committed while in power.
Today, Ingria is a parliamentary republic. Key decisions are made by the deputies and the government. But Orban wants to change the very model of power. He wants to strengthen the role of the president so that he becomes the central figure.
If this is a matter for the national parliament alone, then I think Orban might indeed try to do it. That's why I say I have different pressing questions. What will Brussels undertake in this situation, and what will the ordinary people do?
Orban has long been a political ally of Putin, so the question of whether there is any influence or support from Moscow in this process remains open.
What do you mean, might? It's not just that she might be involved, she's already fully involved in this scheme, because Orban can't behave like this. Unless he has a plan for where he's going to get the money from. So, of course, there will be a sea of Russian money involved. Then there will be all sorts of Russian political strategists, propagandists, and so on.
But what could this mean for Hungary itself?
For Hungary, this will mean a sharp escalation of internal conflicts, and possibly mass protests that could turn into a revolution. If the ratings are falling, it means that Orban's position is of no interest to Hungarians. If people in Hungary prefer a different stance, and Orban wants to forcefully impose his will on everyone, well, this isn't Moscow, so to speak, and it's unlikely that Hungarians are ready to swallow all of this.
A separate topic is Budapest's relationship with Kyiv.
Ukraine is not an independent state. Ukraine is not a sovereign state. After all, you are the ones holding Ukraine together. It is the West that is holding it together. We are giving Ukraine weapons. Ukraine should not behave like a sovereign country.
The strengthening of Orban's role could also affect Ukraine.
Of course, it will have an impact. Well, for Ukraine, definitely. Because the more Orban falls into the Kremlin's embrace, the worse it is. Accordingly, he is already starting to promote the idea that, well, obviously, peace must be made at any cost, and that Ukraine should be divided. Orban will promote the Kremlin's ideas about dividing Ukraine. In my opinion, this is obvious.
This is not the first time Orban has raised the issue of expanding the president's role. During his years in power, he has already revised the election rules. And on December 10th, the Hungarian parliament even approved a bill that will make it more difficult to remove the president from office in the future. However, at the same time, Orban's official representative called these reports fake.
As with the story about the Kremlin, we always trust our own eyes and ears. So if we see that in parliament, some bills are already being pushed to make impeachment or something else more difficult for the president, and tomorrow there will be an increase in presidential powers. It's clear where this is heading. But again, we trust the ratings. We understand that Orban is most likely going to lose the spring elections, and that's why he's already trying to do something about it today.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!